My beloved child, there is something moving behind the scenes of your life that you could not have recognized when it first happened, because what looked like an ordinary decision was actually the beginning of a completely different chapter. You thought you were simply choosing peace, walking away from confusion, protecting your heart, or refusing to chase someone who could not give you clarity, but your decision created a chain of events that quietly protected a person connected to your future. Tonight, this message comes as a spiritual story of timing, hidden protection, and a connection that may have been changing long before either of you understood what was happening. There was a moment when your soulmate was closer to losing hope than you ever realized, and you were completely unaware of what they were experiencing at that time. They were carrying pressure, disappointment, emotional exhaustion, and a situation that could have pushed them toward a decision they would later regret, yet something interrupted that path before it became permanent. You were not standing beside them physically, you were not giving them instructions, and you did not even know their circumstances, but something you had done earlier became part of the reason they stopped and reconsidered their direction. Archangel Michael says this is not a story about coincidence being forced into meaning, but about recognizing how one person's healing can influence another person's path without either person seeing the entire picture. Your decision to stop accepting what drained you changed your energy, your boundaries, your priorities, and the way you responded to situations that once controlled your emotions. While you believed you were simply becoming stronger for yourself, someone connected to your journey was also being pulled away from choices that would have taken them farther from the person they were becoming. And there is a detail you must understand before this message unfolds, because the greatest part of this story is not that you saved someone through a dramatic action or a miraculous rescue, but that you protected them through the person you decided to become. You stopped reacting the way you once reacted, you stopped begging for explanations that never came, and you stopped allowing temporary emotions to decide permanent directions. That transformation created distance from one path and opened space for another, and your soulmate may eventually understand that your silence, your growth, and your refusal to settle were connected to the turning point they needed. Type Amen 111 if this message resonates with your heart. There was a period when your soulmate felt as though their life was moving without direction, even though from the outside everything appeared normal. They could have been working, talking to people, making plans, laughing in conversations, and continuing with responsibilities while privately feeling that something important was missing. The strange part is that they did not fully know what they were searching for, because they had not yet understood that they were looking for a connection based on peace rather than temporary excitement. During that same period, you were experiencing your own transformation, and it may have felt completely unrelated to them. You were learning to recognize emotional patterns, walking away from unnecessary conflict, becoming more selective with your attention, and discovering that your worth did not depend on someone else's ability to recognize it. Every time you chose peace instead of chaos, you were quietly preparing yourself for a relationship that would require emotional maturity from both sides. Your soulmate, meanwhile, was being confronted with situations that exposed the difference between attention and genuine connection. People could come into their life offering excitement, compliments, promises, or temporary comfort, but something inside them continued to feel unsettled because the connection did not provide the emotional safety they secretly needed. They may have tried convincing themselves that everything was fine, but the more they experienced shallow connections, the more clearly they began to recognize what they had been missing. Then something happened that changed the direction of their thinking, and it was not necessarily a dramatic event that everyone around them could see. It may have been a conversation, a sudden realization, an unexpected disappointment, or simply one quiet night when they recognized that they had been repeating the same emotional cycle for too long. That moment did not immediately bring them to you, but it began removing them from the path that would have kept them unavailable to the kind of connection they were eventually meant to recognize. Type Amen 333 if you believe that what is meant for your growth cannot be destroyed by temporary confusion. You may have wondered why certain people disappeared from your life even when you wanted answers from them. You may have questioned why certain opportunities closed just when you thought they were finally opening, and why certain connections became distant without giving you the closure you expected. Yet within this spiritual story, those endings were not presented as punishments but as movements that created room for something healthier. Your soulmate also experienced endings that they did not fully understand. A person they once trusted may have disappointed them, a situation they expected to continue may have collapsed, or a plan they believed was secure may have suddenly changed. At first, they may have viewed those experiences as losses, but eventually they began realizing that some doors had closed because continuing through them would have kept them trapped in an identity they had already outgrown. Meanwhile, you were becoming less available to anything that required you to abandon yourself. That was important because the person you were becoming could no longer comfortably live inside the patterns that had once felt familiar. Your soulmate needed to grow as well, because a healthy connection could not be built from one healed person and one person still running from everything that required honesty. The hidden connection between your journeys was not that you controlled their life or that they controlled yours, but that both of you were being shaped by separate experiences that eventually prepared you for the same emotional lesson. You were learning self-respect, while they were learning accountability, and both lessons were necessary before a meaningful connection could become possible. What looked like separate stories was gradually becoming one larger story of growth, timing, and recognition. Type Amen 777 if your heart is ready for a healthier chapter. There is another part of this message that may surprise you because the moment you think saved your soulmate may not have been a moment when you even thought about them. Perhaps you refused to participate in something that could have created unnecessary drama, or perhaps you chose not to respond to a message when your emotions were high. Maybe you decided to remain silent instead of saying something hurtful, and that small decision protected your own future from a chain of consequences you could never have predicted. Your soulmate was also making choices during this period, and some of those choices were shaped by the consequences they had witnessed around them. They began seeing how quickly trust could disappear when people acted without thinking, and they began understanding that emotional decisions could create damage that apologies could not always repair. Slowly, they became more careful about who they allowed close to them and more honest about what they actually wanted. At some point, they may have heard something about you without directly seeking the information. A mutual connection could have mentioned your name, someone could have described your character, or they might have unexpectedly encountered something that reminded them of you. Instead of immediately acting, they quietly stored that information because something about it felt different from what they had previously experienced. This is where the story becomes more interesting, because recognition does not always happen at the moment two people meet. Sometimes recognition begins when one person hears about the other and suddenly feels an unexplained sense of familiarity, not because they have a supernatural certainty, but because the qualities being described match something they have been searching for without knowing how to describe it. Your soulmate may have started realizing that the person they were becoming was naturally moving toward values they could associate with you. Type Amen 555 if you are choosing peace over confusion. Your journey has also contained moments when you believed you were being forgotten, overlooked, or replaced. You may have watched other people appear to receive the attention you wanted, while your own story seemed painfully quiet. But the silence was not proof that nothing was happening, because many of the most important changes in a person's life happen before there is any visible evidence. Your soulmate may have been observing life differently than before. They could have become more aware of how people treat others when there is nothing to gain, how someone behaves during conflict, and how genuine affection differs from temporary attraction. Those observations slowly changed their standards, and higher standards eventually made it harder for them to accept connections that once seemed exciting. You were changing too, and your transformation may have been visible to people around you even if you did not notice it yourself. Your presence became calmer, your reactions became more measured, and your attention became harder to obtain through manipulation or emotional games. That kind of growth does not make a person cold, it makes them more intentional about where their heart belongs. The most powerful part is that your soulmate may eventually realize that the person you became was exactly the person they needed to meet after their own lessons were complete. If they had encountered you earlier, before either of you had grown, the same connection could have produced confusion instead of peace. Sometimes timing protects a relationship by delaying it until the people involved are capable of handling what they once would have destroyed. Type Amen 888 if you believe your growth has prepared you for something better. There is a hidden memory your soulmate may carry from a difficult period in their life, and it involves a decision they almost made. They may not even remember every detail now, but they remember how close they came to choosing a direction that would have changed everything. Something made them pause, and after that pause, the situation unfolded differently. They could have accepted an opportunity that would have taken them far away from their current path, entered a relationship that would have consumed their emotional energy, or made a commitment before they were ready. Yet the circumstances shifted, and what seemed frustrating at the time eventually became one of the reasons they remained available for a different future. Your own choices may have played a quiet role in that larger timeline because you were also refusing certain paths. You might have turned down something that looked attractive, stepped away from someone who wanted access to your attention without offering genuine commitment, or simply decided that being alone was better than being emotionally exhausted. That decision strengthened a boundary that would later become important. The story does not require you to believe that every event was controlled from above, because its deeper message is about how growth creates new possibilities. When you change your behavior, you change the situations you tolerate, and when your soulmate changes their behavior, they also change the situations they enter. Eventually, two people can arrive at the same place because both have independently learned how to stop repeating what hurt them. Type Amen 222 if you are leaving old patterns behind. There was a version of your soulmate who would not have known how to receive the love you are capable of giving. That version may have confused intensity with intimacy, attention with commitment, and attraction with emotional safety. They needed experiences that taught them that a lasting connection requires consistency, honesty, patience, and responsibility. You also had a version of yourself that might have accepted less than you deserved simply because you wanted to feel chosen. That version may have tolerated mixed signals, over-explained your feelings, waited too long for someone to change, or believed that proving your loyalty would eventually make another person understand your value. But that version of you was not the final version. The person you are becoming has learned that love should not require constant self-abandonment. You can care deeply while maintaining boundaries, you can forgive without returning to unhealthy situations, and you can remain compassionate without allowing someone else's confusion to become your permanent burden. That emotional maturity is part of what makes the future connection different from the connections that exhausted you. Your soulmate has lessons of their own, and their growth may not look exactly like yours. They may be learning to communicate instead of disappearing, to admit mistakes instead of defending them, and to show affection through consistent actions instead of occasional emotional intensity. Those changes may be slow, but they are significant because the future of a connection depends more on character than on chemistry. Type Amen 444 if you are becoming the strongest and most peaceful version of yourself. There is a moment approaching in this story when your soulmate begins connecting pieces that once appeared unrelated. They remember an old conversation, an unexpected encounter, a name someone mentioned, or a situation that once seemed insignificant. Suddenly, those fragments begin forming a pattern in their mind, and they realize that the person they dismissed as unimportant may have represented something they were not emotionally prepared to recognize. This realization may create a strange mixture of regret and gratitude. They could regret the moments when they failed to understand you, while feeling grateful that life gave them another opportunity to grow before they crossed paths again. Instead of rushing forward blindly, they begin studying their own intentions because they do not want to approach you with the same emotional habits that once created distance. Your soulmate may also become more protective of your name and reputation in conversations where you are not present. They may not make dramatic announcements, but they could quietly refuse to participate when someone speaks about you unfairly. That change matters because it shows that their connection to you is becoming less about possession and more about respect. At the same time, you may notice changes within yourself that seem unrelated to them. You may feel less anxious about the future, less desperate for confirmation, and more comfortable allowing life to unfold naturally. That calmness is important because the moment you stop trying to force an outcome, you become better able to recognize what is genuinely aligned with your values. Type Amen 999 if you are ready to receive clarity without chasing it. Your soulmate may eventually understand that you saved them without knowing because your boundaries protected the possibility of a healthier future. You did not rescue them from a specific physical danger, and you were not responsible for every choice they made. Instead, your decision to become emotionally healthier helped create a standard they could eventually recognize and respect. Imagine the difference between meeting someone who desperately needs to be loved and meeting someone who understands that love is valuable enough to be protected. The first person may cling, fear loss, and accept almost anything to keep a connection alive, while the second person can love deeply without losing their identity. Your growth has been moving you toward the second kind of love. Your soulmate may have spent time believing that the strongest connection would be the most dramatic one. Then life began teaching them that drama can exhaust the heart, while consistency gives the heart room to breathe. They started valuing small acts of consideration, honest communication, emotional stability, and the quiet confidence of someone who does not need to prove their worth every day. That is why the person they eventually recognize in you may feel different from anyone they have known before. You may not be the loudest person in their world, you may not demand the most attention, and you may not compete with anyone for a place in their life. Yet your presence can represent something they have gradually learned to value more than temporary excitement. Type Amen 1212 if this new chapter speaks to your spirit. There is also a message here about the people who tried to convince you that your standards were too high. Some may have suggested that you should accept whatever attention came your way, stop expecting consistency, or settle simply because time was passing. But every time you refused to compromise your deepest values, you protected yourself from entering a connection that could have delayed your real emotional growth. Your soulmate may have faced similar pressure. Friends, relatives, co-workers, or circumstances could have encouraged them toward relationships that looked convenient but did not feel right internally. They may have listened for a while, but eventually they became aware that living according to other people's expectations was creating more confusion than peace. The turning point came when they started taking responsibility for their own emotional choices. They stopped blaming circumstances for everything that went wrong and began asking themselves what they needed to change. That internal shift made them more capable of recognizing the difference between someone who simply wants them and someone who genuinely understands them. Your story and theirs therefore contain a similar lesson, even though the details may be completely different. Both of you are learning that a meaningful relationship cannot be built simply because two people feel attracted to each other. It requires two people who are willing to grow, communicate, respect boundaries, and choose each other through consistent actions. Type Amen 7777 if you believe real love requires real growth. Now the hidden part of the story becomes clearer. Your soulmate may have once believed that they needed someone who would never challenge them, never ask them to grow, and never expect accountability from them. But life gradually showed them that comfort without honesty can become another form of loneliness. You may have been exactly the kind of person they were not ready for earlier. Your standards, emotional depth, independence, or calmness could have made them uncomfortable because they could sense that you would not easily accept excuses. Yet the same qualities that once intimidated them may eventually become the qualities they respect most. This is why the connection may have taken longer than expected. A fast beginning would not necessarily have created a lasting relationship, because both of you needed experiences that strengthened your emotional foundations. The delay became part of the preparation, allowing each person to confront personal patterns before bringing those patterns into a shared story. Your soulmate may now be entering a stage where they no longer want to repeat old cycles. They may be tired of starting over, tired of temporary connections, and tired of pretending that emotional emptiness is the same as independence. Something inside them is becoming quieter, more serious, and more focused on what actually matters. Type Amen 3333 if you are ready for a connection built on peace and truth. There may also be a person from your soulmate's past who played an unexpected role in this transformation. That person may have shown them exactly what they never wanted to experience again, and although the experience was painful, it clarified their emotional boundaries. Your soulmate began understanding that love without respect eventually becomes exhausting. You may have experienced something similar in your own journey. Someone may have taught you what inconsistency feels like. Someone may have shown you how painful uncertainty can become, or someone may have made you realize that you were giving more than you were receiving. Those experiences were not the definition of your future, but they became lessons that changed your standards. Because of those lessons, you are no longer entering relationships with the same expectations you once carried. You may still desire deep affection, but you also desire stability, honesty, and mutual effort. You may still want romance, but you no longer want romance that requires you to ignore reality. Your soulmate is learning the same distinction. They are discovering that being wanted is not enough if the connection does not provide respect, and being desired is not enough if trust is constantly being damaged. This awareness is what prepares them to recognize a person whose presence feels peaceful rather than confusing. Type Amen 666 if you are choosing what honors your heart. There is a beautiful possibility within this story that you may have unknowingly protected your soulmate from becoming someone they did not want to become. Your existence as a person committed to growth can become a reminder that better relationships require better versions of ourselves. Even without direct contact, the qualities you embody can inspire someone to reconsider what they are willing to accept in their own life. Your soulmate may hear your name one day and realize that they have been hearing about you through different people or circumstances for longer than they thought. A small comment from one person, a memory from another, and an unexpected encounter can eventually create a moment where everything feels connected. They may begin wondering why your presence kept appearing at different points in their journey. That realization does not mean they will immediately understand everything. They may need time to process what they feel, especially if they recognize that they once misunderstood you or failed to appreciate something important. A mature person does not rush into another person's life simply because they suddenly experience an emotional awakening. Instead, they begin preparing themselves. They think about what they would say, what they would need to apologize for, what promises they could realistically keep, and whether their actions could match their words. That preparation is important because genuine transformation is demonstrated through behavior, not declarations. Type Amen 1111 if you are ready for actions that match words. Your soulmate may eventually approach the connection differently because they no longer want to impress you with temporary gestures. They may want to demonstrate consistency over time, allowing trust to grow naturally rather than demanding that you believe everything immediately. That approach will feel very different from the emotional uncertainty you may have experienced before. You may also find yourself responding differently. Instead of immediately giving everything away because you are excited, you may observe carefully, listen closely, and allow actions to reveal intentions. You will not need to become cold or suspicious, because your boundaries can protect your heart while your compassion remains intact. The greatest change may happen inside you when you realize that you no longer need someone else's arrival to prove that your journey had meaning. Your healing already matters, your growth already matters, and the person you have become already deserves peace. If a soulmate connection enters your life, it should add to that peace rather than become the source of your identity. That is why this story is ultimately not about waiting for another person to save you. It is about recognizing that you may have already saved yourself from the version of love that would have kept you small, anxious, and uncertain. By choosing yourself, you created the possibility of meeting someone who can choose you without asking you to abandon yourself. Type Amen 5555 if you choose yourself without closing your heart to love. There is one final hidden detail that deserves attention. Your soulmate may have once believed that losing you meant losing a person, but eventually they may understand that what was almost lost was an entire possibility of becoming better. The connection represents not only romance but also the version of themselves they could become when they stop running from emotional responsibility. They may remember moments when they almost reached out but decided not to. They may remember times when pride kept them silent, fear kept them distant, or uncertainty made them wait. Those memories could eventually become lessons rather than sources of regret, because each one shows them how much their emotional maturity has changed. You may also remember your own moments of hesitation. There were times when you almost returned to old patterns, almost accepted less than you wanted, or almost allowed loneliness to convince you that you should settle. Yet something inside you kept saying that your future deserved more than temporary comfort. That inner decision became one of the most important choices of your journey. You did not know who would benefit from it, you did not know when the results would appear, and you did not know whether anyone would ever recognize your growth. But you continued anyway, and that is what makes the transformation meaningful. Type Amen 777 if you have survived chapters that once felt impossible to understand. Your soulmate's path may now be moving toward a place where they can recognize what they once overlooked. They may begin valuing the qualities they previously dismissed, especially emotional stability, loyalty, patience, honesty, and the ability to remain kind without becoming weak. Their definition of love is changing because their definition of themselves is changing. There may come a moment when they finally understand the strange timing of everything. They may look back at the people they met, the relationships that ended, the opportunities that disappeared, and the decisions that redirected them, and suddenly see how those experiences shaped their current perspective. The past will not look perfect, but it will look purposeful in the sense that every lesson contributed something to their maturity. You may experience your own version of that realization. You may look back and see that the rejection you cried over prevented you from entering a situation that would have drained you, or that the delay you hated gave you time to become stronger. Some endings will still hurt when you remember them, but they will no longer control the direction of your life. And when the right connection appears, you will recognize the difference because peace will not feel boring anymore. You will understand that stability can be exciting when it is accompanied by genuine affection, and consistency can feel deeply romantic when you have experienced enough uncertainty to appreciate it. Your heart will not need chaos to convince itself that something is real. Type Amen 8888 if peace is becoming your new standard. My beloved child, the message reaches its deepest point here because the person you saved without knowing may not only be your soulmate in the romantic sense of the story, but also a symbol of what happens when one person's healing creates space for another person's healing. Your journey shows that you do not need to control another person's path to influence the kind of love that eventually reaches you. You only need to continue